The starfield on the main viewport was a lie. It promised infinity, the cold, beautiful promise of an endless universe. But for Captain Elara Vesra, standing on the bridge of the battle station Kalar Prime Sentinel, the view had become a cage. The stars were not points of light to be visited. They were the bars of a prison, and in the darkness between them, monsters swam. Another star bloomed in the false night. It was brief, terrible, and agonizingly silent through the vacuum. A searing white point that swelled, consumed a shape she knew intimately, the distinct, hammerhead silhouette of the coalition cruiser Stalwart Dawn, and then faded, leaving only an expanding cloud of incandescent gas and microscopic debris. That made 23 ships in the last hour. 23 families who would never be whole again. 23 sets of final, frantic transmissions that still echoed in the silent spaces of her mind. She didn't need to hear the casualty reports to know the numbers. Each of those brief, artificial stars had extinguished thousands of lives. Engineers, scientists, cooks, young ensigns on their first tour, grizzled veterans a month from retirement. All of them, gone. Elara's hand, resting on the cool, polished railing of the command dais, trembled. She curled her fingers into a fist, her short, sharp claws digging into her own palm. The pain was an anchor, a tiny, private counterpoint to the vast, screaming agony of her command dying around her. Her plumage, usually a vibrant, expressive cerulean blue, had dulled to a listless gray, the color of ash and defeat. It had been leaching its color for 47 days. That was how long the Zathrron swarm had held them in this silent, grinding siege. 47 days of watching her people, her friends, die by inches. "Captain," a voice rasped from the sensor station. It was Lieutenant Jax, a normally unflappable Kelith whose feathers were now as muted as her own. His voice, like everyone's on the bridge, was sandpaper rough, stripped of hope and worn thin by exhaustion. They're moving again. On the main tactical screen, the enemy fleet shifted. It was not the ordered, geometric movement of a conventional navy. This was an organic, pulsing flow, like a school of predatory fish or a swarm of locusts darkening the sky. Hundreds of them. The Zathrron bioships were living things, grotesque amalgamations of chitin, pulsating membranes, and bony protrusions, each one a vessel for the single, relentless consciousness that directed them all. The Overmind. They were not a race that negotiated. They did not offer terms. They did not feel mercy. They were a force of cosmic consumption, a cancer that spread between the stars, absorbing all life, all individuality, into their silent, screaming collective. Elara had fought in 3 wars. She had the medals and the scars to prove it. She had faced pirates, separatists, even the brief, brutal conflict with the Gorn hegemony. But that had been war as a political, if violent, exercise. This was different. This was an extermination, a nightmare from which there was no waking. "How many ships do we have left?" she asked, her voice low. She already knew. She had memorized the list an hour ago, each name a stone in her gut. Jax's shoulders slumped. 23. Captain. Most are running on emergency power. Life support is failing on 7 of them. The Sea Serpent's wrath. It's gone dark. No power signatures at all. 23. They had started with 200. A full coalition battle group, the pride of the 7th Fleet. Now, they were a handful of battered, bleeding hulks, huddled around a station that was itself on the verge of death. The Zathrron, in that same time, had barely lost 50 of their number. The math was a brutal, inescapable conclusion. A priority transmission chimed, its soft tone grotesquely cheerful in the tomb-like silence of the bridge. Elara's heart clenched. She recognized the frequency. "Put it through to my station," she ordered, her throat tight. The screen on her command chair lit up. The face that appeared was familiar, yet so changed it was like a punch to the chest. Commander Rail Talk, of the Aquarian Marine Fleets. His people were amphibious, their skin a lustrous, scale-dappled gray, their eyes large and luminous. Now, his skin was pale, almost translucent with stress, and the fine membranes of his gills fluttered rapidly. Behind him, the bridge of his ship, the Tidal Grace, was shrouded in emergency lighting, smoke hazing the air. "Elara," he said, his voice a hollow echo of its usual, booming confidence. They had been cadets together. He had taught her to swim in the saline pools of Aquaria's lunar outpost. She had introduced him to the fiery spices of Kelith cuisine. A lifetime ago. "Rail," she breathed, "your ship, hull breaches in 3 sections. The outer decks are open to vacuum." He gave a weak, gurgling laugh that held no humor. "We can't contain it. The damage control teams." He trailed off, the loss in his eyes saying everything. "Get your crew to the escape pods," Elara said, the order feeling futile even as she gave it. "I'll dispatch tugs. Create a corridor. They're jamming the launch systems, Elara. You know they are. We're trapped in here." He looked away from the screen for a moment, and she heard a distant, groaning shriek of metal from his end. When he looked back, his gaze was clear, resigned. Don't waste your ships on a rescue. You need every gun you have on that defense line." "Rail, tell my clutch mates," he interrupted, his voice firming with a final, terrible dignity. "Tell them I fought well. To the last. Tell them the water was clear." The transmission ended. The screen went dark. Elara's fist slammed into the armrest of her chair, the impact a dull, satisfying thud. She wanted to scream. She wanted to weep until there was nothing left. She wanted to tear the command console from its housing and hurl it through the viewport. But she was a captain. Her crew, what was left of them, needed a rock. They needed a pillar. So she swallowed the acid grief, forced her breathing to steady, and lifted her head. 2 minutes later, the sensor screen registered a massive energy spike from the Tidal Grace's last known position. Its warp core had breached. Another brief, terrible star. Another friend, consigned to the void. "Captain," she turned. Lieutenant Kess stood a few feet away, his young face a mask of anguish and uncertainty. He was too young for this. They all were, but Kes especially. He still believed in the rule book, in the idea that if you followed procedures and had enough courage, things would work out. The past 47 days had been a brutal education to the contrary. "Lieutenant," she said, her voice scraped raw. "High Command. They just sent a new dispatch." He hesitated, clutching a data slate as if it were a poisonous serpent. Elara felt a cold dread settle in her stomach. And what wisdom do our esteemed leaders have for us from the safety of the core worlds? Kes swallowed hard. They acknowledge the tactical impossibility of our situation. They commend our valor. And they recommend we surrender to preserve what life we can. The bridge went utterly, profoundly silent. The constant, low hum of the life support systems, the beeping of consoles, the soft rustle of movement, it all ceased. Every officer, every crew member, turned to look at her. In their eyes, she saw not fear of death, but a far deeper terror. Surrender to the Zathrron was not an end to suffering, it was the beginning of a new, unspeakable horror. To be absorbed was to be unmade. Your memories, your loves, your fears, all dissolved into the psychic soup of the overmind. You would become a passenger in your own body, forced to watch as it was used to consume others, to feel the collective's hunger as your own, forever. It was a fate worse than any clean death in the vacuum. Elara rose from her chair. She felt every one of her years, every one of the 47 days of this siege, weighing on her. But she stood straight, her gray plumage bristling with a defiance she did not entirely feel. "No," she said, and the word was flat, final, a stone dropped into a still pond. "We do not surrender." "But, Captain," a young communications ensign whispered, her voice trembling, "the civilians, the planet." Alara's gaze swept across her crew. "There are still 3 million souls on Kalar Prime beneath us. Men, women, children. They are hiding in the deep bunkers, praying for a miracle we cannot give them. But every hour we hold this line, every minute we keep the Zathrron focused on us, is another minute they have to evacuate deeper, to hide better, to live. We are not just soldiers. We are a shield, and we will hold, until there is nothing left of us to hold with." She saw the despair in their eyes warily give way to something else. Not hope. That was too fragile a thing, but resolve. A grim, fatalistic determination. They would die as they had lived, as members of the coalition, as protectors. Kes, however, did not look away. He took a hesitant step forward. "Captain, there is one option. An old one. It's not in any current tactical manual." Elara frowned. "What option, Lieutenant?" "The Arkangel Beacon," he said, his voice dropping. "The ancient distress signal. The one that's hardwired into the station's core. It's programmed to broadcast on the old human emergency frequencies." Elara felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. The humans. A name from history books, from ghost stories. The dark zone. Kes. You want to call out to a graveyard. Human space has been silent for 3 centuries. Yes, Kes pressed, a flicker of his old idealism breaking through. But the beacon uses their quantum entanglement technology. The signal is instantaneous, regardless of distance. If anyone is listening, out there. Nobody is listening, Lieutenant, Elara said, her voice weary. The humans made their choice. After the Krathnok War, after they lost Earth, after they lost everything, their last message was clear. We are going dark. Do not follow. Do not call us. We need time to heal. Then they vanished. They abandoned the galaxy. They are gone, Kes. Either dead or so lost in their own grief they cannot hear us. Or maybe they're waiting for a call worth answering. Kes's voice rose with a surprising passion. What do we have to lose, Captain? The Zathrron will break through in a few hours. We will be dead or worse. The beacon is a button. We can press it as we fall. A final act of defiance. A message in a bottle thrown into the darkest ocean. Maybe someone will find it. Elara looked at the tactical display. The Zathrron swarm was coalescing, a dark storm preparing to break upon their last, fragile shore. She looked at the faces of her crew, waiting for her to lead them into the fire. She thought of Rail Talk, his final words. Tell them I fought well. She closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of the entire Kalar system on her shoulders. It was a fantasy, a children's story, but Kes was right. What did they have to lose? She opened her eyes. Activate it. A ripple went through the bridge. The crew sprang into action with the energy they hadn't shown in weeks. The Arkangel Beacon was a relic, buried deep in the station's architecture, a piece of technology so advanced the Coalition's best engineers had never been able to replicate it, only maintain its basic functions. Beacon is active, Kes reported from the comms station, his fingers flying across the console. Broadcasting on all designated human emergency frequencies. The quantum signal is propagating. It's gone. And now we wait. Jax asked from sensors, his voice skeptical. If anyone is listening, Kes said, it could be minutes. It could be never. Elara nodded. She hadn't expected anything else. But as she returned to her command chair, she felt a strange, faint flicker. Not hope, but something akin to it. The simple, profound satisfaction of having tried everything. 6 hours passed. The beacon pulsed its silent, desperate plea into the unimaginable vastness. No response came. The Zathrron launched their final assault. It was a tidal wave of chitin and rage. 400 bioships moved as one, a wall of organic horror that blotted out the starfield. They fired volleys of acid projectiles that sizzled against failing shields and ate through armor like paper. They released clouds of microscopic spores that infiltrated ventilation systems, rewriting code and choking life support. All ships, fall back to the station. Elara's voice was calm, a practiced mask over the screaming dread inside. Final defensive positions. Get all remaining civilians into the core shelters. This is where we make our stand. The station became a frantic hive of controlled chaos. Crews rushed to their battle stations. The few remaining fighter pilots sprinted to their craft for one last, suicidal sortie. And through the corridors, a sad, silent river flowed. Parents clutching children, the old and the infirm, being shepherded into the heavily reinforced heart of the Sentinel. It was a temporary refuge, a steel coffin that would buy them, at best, a few extra hours of life before the Zathrron broke through. Elara stood at her post on the bridge, a statue of grim resolve. On the main viewer, death approached, beautiful and terrible in its totality. She had done all she could. She had held the line. It would have to be enough. Then, Lieutenant Jax shouted, his voice cracking with the emotion she couldn't immediately identify. "Captain, something's happening. At the system's edge, near the 9th planet's orbital track." "What is it?" she demanded, her heart hammering against her ribs. "More Zathrron." "No, it's a gravitational anomaly. Space itself is bending, twisting. I've never seen readings like this." Every eye on the bridge turned to the sensor displays. There, on the fringes of the system, where nothing should be, the fabric of reality was writhing. A patch of stars distorted, smeared like wet paint on glass. Vesra felt that tiny spark within her catch, flare into a fragile, dangerous flame. It was hope. Terrifying, desperate hope. She leaned forward, her voice a whisper meant only for herself, for the ghosts of her lost ships, for the silent listeners in the dark. "Forgive us for calling." And in the endless dark beyond the frozen outer planets, something began to answer. Part 2. Ghosts from the Machine. Memories, unbidden, surfaced in Elara's mind. The sterile, brightly lit lecture hall of the Coalition Academy. She was a young cadet, her plumage still a vibrant, untested blue, sitting among hundreds of other eager faces. The instructor was a grizzled old Kelith veteran, Commander Warlic. One of his wings was a prosthetic, a sleek metallic replacement for the one he'd lost in the war. The real war. The one that had defined the galaxy. "The humans," Warlic had said, his voice a dry rasp, "saved us all. Don't let any historian, any politician tell you differently. When the Krathnok Dominion swept through the Outer Rim, they were an extinction-level event. We thought it was the end of everything." He had paced before the holographic display showing ancient fleet movements. Then Terra joined the fight. His eyes had grown distant, looking at something, or someone, only he could see. "I served under a human commander once. Admiral Chen. Alexander Chen. He didn't fight like we fought. For us, battle was a brutal, honorable exchange of fire. For him, it was an art. He fought like he was composing a symphony of destruction. Every move was precise, every decision the right one. I saw him, with a single carrier group, outmaneuver and destroy 3 Krathnok dreadnoughts. It was beautiful and terrifying." Young Elara, full of fire and questions, had raised her hand. "Sir, where are they now?" "The humans." Warlic had stopped his pacing, his expression collapsing into a profound, weary sadness. "Gone, cadet. The war, it cost them everything. They lost their homeworld, Earth. A garden planet, they said. The most beautiful world in the galaxy. Gone. Billions of their people, incinerated. When the war was finally won, when the last Krathnock ship was scuttled, they sent one final, galaxy-wide transmission. He looked at each of them in turn. They said, "We are going dark. Do not follow. Do not call us. We need time to heal." Then they vanished, took their ships, their technology, their ghosts, and left. Some say they died out. I prefer to think they're still out there, licking their wounds in the dark. Now, decades later, standing on the bridge of her dying station, watching a spatial distortion that defied physics, Elara wondered if the old commander's stories had been more than just legends. Were they prophecies? "Captain, the anomaly is stabilizing," Jax reported, his voice trembling with excitement and fear. "The gravitational distortion it's forming a stable aperture. It's a rift. Could it be a Zathrron weapon?" Lieutenant Kess asked, his face pale. "Something new." Elara shook her head, her eyes fixed on the viewer. "No, this signature is all wrong. It's clean. Technological. This is something else." The Zathrron had noticed. A portion of their fleet, 50 bioships, broke off from the main assault and vectored toward the anomaly. The hive mind was cautious. This was an unknown variable. It needed to be probed, tested, and consumed. The 50 Zathrron ships formed a perfect, predatory sphere around the shimmering rift, their organic weapons systems glowing with malevolent energy. They waited. Then, lights. Not the bioluminescent glow of the Zathrron, but sharp, angular, manufactured lights. Running lights. Navigation strobes. The kind of lights vessels used to signal their presence to others, to say, "I am here." The lights spread, sketching the outline of something in the void. It was a shape that grew, and kept growing, uncloaking from whatever advanced stealth field had hidden it. "By the ancestors," someone whispered on the bridge. It was a prayer. The ship revealed itself piece by piece. It wasn't just large. Its scale was incomprehensible. It made the battle station, a behemoth in its own right, look like a lifeboat. "Sensors," Elara ordered, her voice hushed. "Give me a size estimate. Now." Jax's hands flew over his console, his readings flickering erratically. "Captain, I'm reading 14 kilometers. Length, 14 kilometers. Mass. The readings are fluctuating. This can't be right. The density is impossible. 14 kilometers. The largest ship ever constructed by the Coalition, the Leviathan-class dreadnought, was a mere 2 kilometers long. This vessel was 7 times that size. A floating city. A continent adrift in the void. But it was its appearance that truly stole Elara's breath. It was scarred, brutally and magnificently. Vast swaths of its hull were pitted and burned, bearing the evidence of countless battles. Entire sections were patched with armor plating of different alloys and colors, a testament to field repairs conducted over centuries. But there were other, more disturbing features. Sections of the hull seemed to be organic. Living metal that pulsed with a soft, internal light, or chitinous plates that looked suspiciously like Zathrron biomatter, but integrated, perfected. Reading hull composition, Jax muttered, his voice full of disbelief. It's a hybrid. Parts are titanium tungsten alloy, standard old human design. But other sections are showing organic signatures, advanced biomechanoids. And the energy readings, I've never seen anything like it. It's like a star is burning in its core. Can you identify it? Elara asked, her heart in her throat. I'm trying. The core design language is human. Terran Confederacy Navy, late 25th century. But it's been modified, heavily. It's like the ship has been evolving, adapting. A human ship. The beacon had worked, but it was alone. One ship, even a colossus, against 400. A Zathrron broadcast slammed into their comms, the overman's voice a chorus of 1,000 consumed species speaking in unison, a psychic assault that made the crew wince. Plus ancient vessel, dead species. You are alone. You will be consumed. Plus. The 50 Zathrron bioships opened fire. A storm of acid and bioplasma streaked across the void, a torrent of annihilation aimed at the newcomer. The human ship, which Jax's sensors now identified as the TCNS Indomitable, didn't evade. It didn't raise shields. It simply continued its stately, implacable advance, accelerating straight into the heart of the barrage. What is it doing? Kes breathed. It's going to be obliterated. The first volley struck. Acid splashed across the Indomitable's bow. Bioplasma detonated against its flanks. And then, the human ship answered. Elara had studied military history. She knew the theory of human weaponry. But theory was a pale, bloodless thing compared to the reality. The Indomitable's rail gun batteries ignited. They weren't the compact, efficient coils of modern coalition designs. These were massive, brutal structures, each one a cathedral dedicated to velocity. They fired tungsten rods, each the size of an ancient skyscraper, accelerated to a significant fraction of light speed. They crossed the distance not in a flash, but in a blink. There was no elegant explosion, no blossoming fireball. When those rods struck a Zathrron bioship, the effect was one of utter, absolute negation. The organic vessel simply ceased to exist, vaporized into its constituent atoms by the sheer, unconscionable transfer of kinetic energy. One moment, a ship. The next, an expanding cloud of superheated gas. By the ancestors, Elara whispered, the words a prayer of terror and awe. More Zathrron ships swarmed, trying to close to point-blank range. The Indomitable's point defense systems activated. It wasn't a curtain of fire. It was a web of light. Lasers, impossibly precise, lanced out, each one intercepting an incoming acid projectile or spore missile with surgical accuracy. The space around the human ship became a glittering, deadly ballet of light and destruction. Nothing got through. Then, a lucky, or calculated, Zathrron shot connected. A concentrated stream of acid burned through a section of the Indomitable's armor on its port side. Plates peeled back, revealing the glowing, vulnerable innards. A cheer started on the bridge, but died in their throats. As they watched, the wound began to heal. The organic, chitinous parts of the hull swarmed over the breach, new material growing at a visible rate, weaving itself together, sealing the gash. Within 30 seconds, the damage was gone, the new armor gleaming faintly. They're using their own technology against them. The sensor officer cried. They've adapted Zathrron biotech. They've made it their own. It took 4 minutes. In 240 seconds, the TCNS Indomitable systematically annihilated all 50 Zathrron vessels. Not a single shot from the swarm had managed to cause lasting damage. The colossal ship never deviated from its course, a force of nature moving with serene, unstoppable purpose, heading straight for Kalar Prime. Heading for them. A new transmission sliced through the comms. Audio only. The voice was human, male, weathered and rough, like stone eroded by centuries of wind and rain. It held no panic, no rage, only a calm, profound certainty. Kalar Prime Station. This is Captain Marcus Chen of the Terran Confederacy Navy, TCNS Indomitable. We heard your beacon. Hold your position. Help is coming. Chen. The name struck Elara like a physical blow. It couldn't be. It was a common name, surely. A coincidence. The Chen of legend was dust 300 years gone. She activated her comm, her own voice sounding small and frail compared to his. Captain Chen, this is Captain Elara Vesra commanding Kalar Prime Station. We are grateful, but you must understand, we have over 400 enemy vessels inbound. Your ship is magnificent, but it is alone. The mathematics. The human captain interrupted her, his voice still preternaturally calm. Captain Vesra, I've been fighting the Zathrron, and things far worse, for 270 years. Trust me. Hold the line for 15 more minutes. Chen out. The transmission ended. Elara stood in the sudden silence, her legs feeling weak. 270 years. The number was incomprehensible. She looked at her crew. Their faces were a mosaic of shock, disbelief, and a wild, fragile hope that was painful to behold. She straightened her uniform tunic, drawing on reserves of strength she didn't know she possessed. You heard the man, she said, her voice gaining strength with each word. All hands, battle stations. Redirect all power to forward shields and point defense. We are not dying today. We are holding the line for 15 more minutes. The bridge erupted into controlled frenzy. The Indomitable was a knife cutting through space toward them. The entire Zathrron swarm was now turning, a dark tide redirecting its fury toward this new, impossible threat. The mathematics still looked impossible. But Elara had seen what that ship could do. She had heard the absolute conviction in Chen's voice. It was the voice of a man who had already stared into the abyss for centuries, and had forced the abyss to blink first. Maybe the old stories were true. Maybe humanity hadn't just been hiding. Maybe they had been preparing. And as the Indomitable drove relentlessly forward, a flicker on the edge of the sensor display caught Elara's eye. Behind the human ship, space was beginning to bend again. Not in one place, but in many. Dozens of points of light began to distort, to tear. Something else was coming. Part 3. The Symphony of War. The Zathrron swarm moved with the chilling synchronicity of a single organism. All 400 remaining ships turned as one, abandoning their assault on the station to face the Indomitable. They formed complex, overlapping attack patterns that had shattered every coalition fleet sent against them. Pincer movements, envelopments, waves of overwhelming fire from multiple vectors. Acid clouds bloomed ahead of them, a corrosive fog designed to dissolve shields and blind sensors. Elara watched, her breath caught in her throat, as the Indomitable did the unthinkable. It didn't try to skirt the edges of the formation. It didn't attempt a fighting retreat. It plunged directly into the very center of the swarm. "It's a suicide run," Lieutenant Kess whispered, his face ashen. "He's surrounding himself." But Captain Chen's voice crackled over the open fleet-wide channel, calm as a man discussing the weather. "All coalition vessels, this is Chen. Listen carefully. I'm going to disrupt their formation from the center. When I do, their coordination will break for approximately 40 seconds. Use that time to target the ships I'm marking on your tactical displays now." Data packets flooded into the Sentinel's combat computers. On Elara's main screen, specific Zathrron ships glowed a stark, urgent red. "These are their nodal coordinators," Chen continued, his voice a steady drumbeat against the chaos. "They act as local processors for the Overmind. Destroy them, and the swarm in your sector loses its cohesion. They'll become confused, uncoordinated. Can you do that?" Elara looked at her weary weapons officer, a veteran Tarkassian whose hands were already flying across his console, programming the new targets. He gave a sharp, grim nod. "We can do it," Elara transmitted back. "All coalition ships, new targeting data is live. Follow the human's lead. Fire on my mark." The Indomitable reached the heart of the Zathrron formation. What happened next was not a battle. It was a symphony of destruction, and Chen was its conductor. The colossal ship began to spin on its central axis while maintaining its forward momentum, a ballet of impossible physics. Its rail-gun batteries, mounted across its entire surface, fired not in volleys, but in a continuous, rolling thunder. Each barrel tracked independently, and every shot was a kill. Tungsten rods became the brushes painting streaks of annihilation across the black canvas of space. Zathrron bioships simply vanished, erased from existence. At the same time, launch bays on the Indomitable's flanks opened, and fighters streamed out. They were small, sleek, and moved with an agility that defied belief. But they flew in patterns no living pilot could sustain. Instantaneous, perfect coordination, maneuvers that would turn an organic crew into a bloody paste inside their suits. "Those are AI," Elara realized aloud. "Fully autonomous." The Coalition had experimented with AI pilots decades ago. They had been capable, but ultimately flawed, lacking the intuition and creativity of living beings. These were different. These moved as a single, distributed consciousness, a swarm that was smarter, faster, and deadlier than the biological one it faced. The Zathrron tried to do what they did best: overwhelm with numbers. Bioships crashed into each other in their urgency to close the distance, to smother the Indomitable in a blanket of chitin and acid. The space around the human ship became a maelstrom of incoming fire. But the Indomitable's point defense was perfect. A web of laser light enveloped the ship, each beam intercepting an incoming projectile with millisecond precision. It was a shield of pure mathematics, an impenetrable barrier of calculated death. When the occasional acid globule managed to splash against the hull, the organic sections would absorb it, the material visibly drinking the corrosive substance and using it to fuel further regeneration. "They've turned the Zathron's greatest weapon into a resource," Jax said, his voice full of awe. "They're not just fighting them, they're farming them. Now, Captain Vesra," Chen's voice came, sharp and clear. "Hit those nodes. All weapons, fire." Elara commanded. The Coalition fleet, battered, broken, but unyielding, unleashed its last, desperate salvo. Beams of concentrated energy, plasma torpedoes, and kinetic slugs poured into the marked Zathrron ships. The nodal coordinators, built for processing power not agility, tried to evade, but it was useless. One by one, they blossomed into silent flowers of fire. And just as Chen had predicted, the swarm's perfect coordination shattered. Zathrron ships, suddenly isolated and blind, collided with one another. Their firing patterns dissolved into random, uncoordinated bursts. For 40 precious seconds, they were not a swarm, but a confused mob of individual creatures. The Indomitable did not waste the opportunity. Its fire became even more precise, more surgical. Chen wasn't just destroying ships at random, he was systematically dismantling the swarm's ability to reform, targeting communication relays and command organisms. The human fleet was learning, adapting in real time, and every piece of data was shared instantly across their network. But the numbers were still overwhelming. For every Zathrron ship that died, 2 more pressed forward. And the Indomitable was finally taking real damage. A sustained volley of bioplasma tore a gash in its starboard flank, venting atmosphere and coolant in a glittering, frozen cloud. Another impact sheared off a sensor array. The ship was bleeding, its majestic form scarred and burning. The Zathrron Overmind broadcast again. This time, its psychic voice carried a new, gloating tone. ++one old ship. Alone and dying. Where are your fleets, human? Where is your vaunted terror? You came alone to die. Noble, but futile. The brief spark of hope on the Coalition bridge flickered. The Overmind was right. The Indomitable had performed miracles, but it was just one ship. A wounded Titan, soon to fall. The end was only delayed. Elara opened a channel to Chen, her heart heavy. "Captain Chen, you have done more than we could ever have asked. You've given us a fighting end. But you need to retreat. Save your ship, your knowledge. Get out while you still can." Chen's response was a low, genuine laugh. It held no mockery, only a deep, weathered amusement. "Retreat. Captain Vesra, you misunderstand the situation entirely." "What do you mean?" Chen's voice changed. The calmness remained, but now it was the calm of a glacier, cold and inexorable, carrying the weight of 3 centuries of loss, rage, and unwavering resolve. He broadcast on all frequencies, a message for every ship in the system, and for the Overmind itself. Overmind, Chen's voice cut through the static like a knife. You asked where Terra is. You asked where our fleets are. You think I'm alone. He paused, and in that silence, Elara could feel the entire battle holding its breath. I'm not the fleet, Chen said, each word dropping like a stone. I'm not the cavalry. I'm not the rescue force. Another pause, and Elara could almost hear the grim smile in his voice. I'm the warning. Behind the Indomitable, space tore itself apart. Not one rift, not two, hundreds of them. Gravitational anomalies bloomed across the system's edge like deadly flowers, each one a wound in reality. And through them, they came. First, the destroyers, sleek and hungry, their profiles sharp as knives. Then the cruisers, broad-shouldered and bristling with weapons. Then the battleships, behemoths that dwarfed the Indomitable, their hulls bearing the names of human worlds lost to fire and sorrow. New Hope, Plymouth, Shangri-La. Finally, the carriers, each one a floating city, their launch bays disgorging wings of AI fighters that darkened the stars. 300 ships emerged in the span of a single minute. A fleet born from 3 centuries of exile and war. A fleet built for one purpose: to ensure that the loss of Earth would never, ever be repeated. At the center of this armada, a dreadnought even larger than the Indomitable took its position. Its hull was pristine, untouched by battle, a masterpiece of preserved power. This was a ship that had been kept in reserve, perfected in secret, waiting for this exact moment. A new voice transmitted across all channels. It was female, and it carried an authority so absolute it made Elara straighten her spine without thought. It was the voice of a woman who commanded stars. Zathrron Overmind. This is Fleet Admiral Sarah Okonkwo of the Terran Confederacy Navy. You are currently in violation of the Kalar system's sovereignty. You have attacked coalition civilians. You have threatened species under our protection. The Admiral's voice hardened, becoming as cold and sharp as a diamond. You have one opportunity. Withdraw from this system immediately, and we will allow you to retreat beyond the rim. Refuse. She let the silence hang, a void more terrifying than any threat. And we will demonstrate why humanity has spent the last 300 years preparing. The Zathrron response was instantaneous, predictable, and fatal. Retreat was not in their nature. The concept of mercy was alien to them. They broadcast a wave of pure, undiluted hatred and charged. It was the last mistake the Overmind would ever make. Admiral Okonkwo gave a single, quiet order. Execute Protocol Ragnarok. The human fleet opened fire as one. And Elara Vesra watched, her mind struggling to comprehend, as the very definition of overwhelming force was rewritten before her eyes. Part 4. The Unbreakable Shield. The battle for Kalar Prime lasted 1 hour and 17 minutes. Elara would remember every second of it for the rest of her life, each moment seared into her memory with the clarity of a lightning strike. The human fleet did not fight like the coalition. Coalition tactics were defensive, methodical. They were about holding positions, preserving assets, wearing down an enemy through attrition. The humans were different. They were aggressive, fluid, and terrifyingly efficient. They were predators. They moved in perfect, silent coordination. There were no chatter-filled comms, no calls for assistance. Every ship knew its role, its position, its target. Their firing patterns created interlocking fields of fire so dense that Zathrron ships simply ceased to exist the moment they entered the kill zone. When the swarm tried to envelop individual human vessels, the fleet would flow around the threat, surrounding the surrounders, cutting them off and annihilating them with breathtaking speed. "They're not fighting as individual ships," her tactical officer murmured, his eyes wide. "They're fighting as one organism. Like the Zathrron, but better. Smarter." It was true. The human fleet possessed the synchronicity of a hive mind, but it was fused with the creativity, the unpredictability, and the ruthless adaptability of individual commanders. It was the evolution of warfare. Chen's voice returned, still preternaturally calm, now acting as a tactical coordinator for the coalition forces. "Captain Vesra, form your remaining ships into defensive position Beta-7 around the station. We're going to push the main swarm toward you. When they enter your optimal firing range, hit them with everything you have. Don't worry about conserving ammunition. We'll resupply you." "Understood," Elara replied, her voice thick with emotion. She gave the orders, and her pitiful handful of ships moved into the formation Chen had designated. The human fleet executed a maneuver that defied belief. Half their number accelerated directly into the Zathron's heart, a brutal, head-on assault that drew the swarm's entire focus. The other half of the fleet vanished, using the system's fourth gas giant for a gravity slingshot of such precision it seemed like magic. They re-emerged directly behind the Zathrron formation, perfectly positioned. Caught in a devastating crossfire, the Zathrron tried to adapt, splitting their swarm to face both threats. It was exactly what the humans had wanted. The moment the swarm divided its attention, the entire human fleet concentrated its apocalyptic firepower on one half. The focused barrage was like the fist of a god. In minutes, nearly 200 Zathrron ships were reduced to expanding dust clouds. Elara watched a human battleship, the TCNS Vengeance, take on 20 Zathrron vessels at point-blank range. Its shields flared a brilliant, blinding white under the assault, but they held. Its return fire was methodical, economical, each shot placed to cause maximum systemic damage. It didn't waste a single joule of energy. "How are they so good?" Lieutenant Kess asked, his voice full of wonder. Elara understood now. "They've been fighting for 300 years, Kess. Not in simulations, not in skirmishes, in a war for survival, out in the dark. They haven't been hiding. They've been learning, adapting, perfecting their craft." Captain Chen's voice came over the fleet-wide channel, as if in answer. "The Zathrron are aggressive, yes. But they are containable. The things we fight in the dark, Lieutenant, make this look like a border dispute. We've spent the last 3 centuries making sure those things never reach you." The Zathrron Overmind, for the first time, broadcast something that might have been fear. Its voice was no longer a confident chorus, but a discordant, confused jumble. Impossible. You are one species. We are the swarm. We are inevitable. We have consumed 1,000 worlds. Admiral Okonkwo's response was ice. And we are the species that lost our homeworld and survived. We are the species that was broken, and rebuilt ourselves stronger. You consume worlds. We avenge them. The human fleet pressed its advantage. Their AI fighters were a blur of motion, too fast and too coordinated for the Zathrron to target. They struck not to destroy, but to cripple, slicing off weapon emplacements, shredding engine manifolds, blinding sensor clusters. They're being precise, Jax observed. They could just vaporize everything, but they're taking them apart. Why? They're studying them, Elara realized with a shock. In the middle of a battle, they're learning every weakness, every vulnerability, and sharing that data across the entire fleet in real time. They're getting better at fighting the Zathrron as we watch. The Zathrron, in their desperation, tried one final, all-or-nothing gambit. They gathered their remaining 200 ships into a single, dense spearhead and aimed it directly at Admiral Okonkwo's flagship, the TCNS Remember Earth. It was a suicide run, a final, spiteful attempt to take the human commander with them. The human response was swift and brutal. Chen's Indomitable, despite its grievous wounds, its hull bleeding air and coolant, moved to intercept. Admiral, Chen's voice was clipped. Permission to engage. Granted. Captain, Okonkwo's voice was calm. Show them what old warriors can do. The Indomitable, a scarred and bleeding lion, roared its defiance and accelerated into the heart of the Zathrron charge. Its rail guns fired until their barrels glowed white-hot, a continuous, thunderous barrage that never ceased. Each shot was a masterpiece of targeting. The ship's biomechanical hull was regenerating even as it fought, wounds sealing shut in real time, new armor plating growing over the scars. Behind it, the rest of the human fleet converged, creating an impenetrable wall of fire and steel. The Zathrron formation shattered. Ships tried to scatter, to flee, but there was nowhere to run. Human vessels were everywhere, methodically cutting off every escape vector. The Zathrron Overmind broadcast one final message. It was different. The arrogance was gone. The confidence was gone. All that remained was a vast, echoing confusion, and something that, in another species, might have been called respect. How? How did you become this? It was Chen who answered. His voice was no longer that of a calm tactician, but of a man who had carried the memory of 1 billion graves for 3 centuries. It was the voice of loss, of determination, of a fire that would never, ever go out. You want to know how? Chen's voice echoed through the silent void. We lost everything. Our home, our people, our future. We went into the dark, into the emptiness, and we asked ourselves one question. Just one. Will we let this happen again? He paused, and the silence was heavier than any star. The answer was no, never again. We rebuilt ourselves, not to be what we were, but to be what we needed to be. We made ourselves strong enough that no one could ever take our home from us again. And we found threats in the deep dark, threats you cannot imagine, and we fought them. We learned from every battle, every loss, every victory. We spent 300 years becoming this. And what is that? The Overmind asked, its voice now little more than a whisper. Guardians, Chen said, the word simple, final, and absolute. Protectors, the shield that stands between the innocent and those who would harm them. The promise that the death of Earth would not be in vain. The last Zathrron ships were systematically destroyed or disabled. The swarm that had terrorized the sector for months, that had destroyed fleets and consumed colonies, was broken in little over an hour. But the humans did not celebrate. There were no triumphant cheers over the comms, no boastful transmissions. The moment the last Zathrron ship was neutralized, the human fleet shifted instantly to a new mode: rescue. Medical frigates, their hulls marked with the ancient symbol of the Red Cross, moved with purpose toward the stricken coalition vessels. Tugs latched onto drifting hulks, stabilizing them and beginning emergency repairs. Supply ships began distributing power cores, medical supplies, and fresh water. Admiral Okonkwo's voice filled the comms once more, but now it was gentle, firm, and reassuring. All coalition vessels, this is Terra. The immediate threat has passed. Medical and engineering support are standing by. We will assist in the evacuation of civilians from the planet and the repair of your damaged vessels. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice held a profound, weary warmth. You called, and we answered. That is what allies do. Tears, hot and unchecked, streamed down Elara Vesra's face. She didn't try to stop them. She let them fall, each one a testament to the friends she had lost, to the terror they had endured, and to the impossible, miraculous deliverance that had come from the darkest corner of the galaxy. They had survived. Against all odds, against all reason, they had survived. A direct, private transmission chimed. Chen's voice, now sounding tired, the weight of his centuries finally audible. Captain Vesra, permission to come aboard your station. I think we have much to discuss. Permission granted, Captain Chen, she said, her voice thick with emotion. And, thank you. From the bottom of what's left of my heart, thank you. Thank us by surviving, Chen replied, his tone softening. The galaxy is going to need good people like you in the centuries to come. Indomitable out, as the human fleet took up defensive positions around Kalar Prime. Not as occupiers, but as protectors, Elara knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her soul, that the galaxy had just irrevocably changed. Humanity had not just returned. They had come back as something new. Something forged in fire and tempered in the long, cold dark. They had come back as guardians. Part 5. The Scars of Time. Captain Chen arrived on Kalar Prime Station 12 hours after the battle ended. The docking bay, usually a bustling hub of activity, was hushed, its cavernous space filled with the scent of ozone, scorched metal, and the underlying, coppery tang of fear that still hadn't dissipated. Elara waited for him with her senior officers, all of them having done their best to clean their uniforms and compose themselves. She wasn't sure what to expect. The old records showed humans as bipedal, mammalian, similar in basic form to her own avian Keleth frame, but it had been 3 centuries. They could have evolved into anything. The airlock hissed, its heavy gears groaning as the door slid open. Marcus Chen stepped through. He was tall, as the records described, but that was where the similarity to the clean-lined, unaugmented humans of the history texts ended. He moved with a slight, deliberate limp, favoring his left leg. Half of his face was a masterpiece of cybernetic integration, silver and black metal seamlessly blended with flesh and bone, one eye a camera lens that glowed with a soft, intelligent blue light. His other eye was organic, a deep, warm brown that held a startling, profound sadness. His right arm, from the shoulder down, was fully mechanical, but it moved with a fluid, organic grace that was unnerving. Scars, both old and new, crisscrossed every visible part of him. A web of fine lines on his organic cheek, a deep gash across his cybernetic brow, the knotted flesh of an old burn peeking above his collar. This was not a man. This was a document of war, a living chronicle of 3 centuries of conflict. But when he saw her, he smiled. It was a genuine, warm expression that transformed his battered face, reaching his organic eye and making the cybernetic one seem somehow less cold. "Captain Vesra," he said, his voice the same weathered rumble from the comms. He offered a slight, formal bow. "The honor is mine. To hold a line with 23 ships against that." He gestured vaguely towards the bay doors, towards the space where the swarm had been. "That takes a courage I haven't seen in a long time. Your people fought with incredible heart." Elara returned the bow, deeply moved. "We did what we had to, Captain Chen. But you and your fleet, you saved us all." She gestured to her crew. "This is my senior staff." Chen nodded to each of them, his gaze respectful. When his eyes fell on Lieutenant Kess, he paused. "You're the one who activated the Arkangel Beacon." Kess, looking stunned, managed a nod. "Why yes, sir. Good initiative, Lieutenant. Stubborn hope is a weapon. Never forget that." He turned back to Elara. "Captain, perhaps we could speak somewhere privately. I think it's time someone explained what humanity has become." They adjourned to the station's main conference room. Chen moved carefully, his mechanical leg emitting a soft, hydraulic whir with each step. Battle damage, Elara realized. He was still healing, even now. Once seated, Chen began, his voice taking on a narrative quality, as if he had told this story many times, but it had lost none of its weight. "When we left Coalition space 300 years ago, we were a broken people," he said, his organic eye looking at something far away. "Earth was gone. Our colonies were ashes. We had won the war against the Krathnok, but the cost was our soul. We decided, as a species, that we would never be that vulnerable again. So we went into the deep, into the unmapped black, and we began to rebuild. Not just our fleet, ourselves." He tapped the cybernetic part of his face. The augmentations are part of it. We integrated biotechnology from species we encountered, and from some we fought. We developed AI not as servants, but as partners, extensions of our own will. We extended our lifespans, enhanced our bodies, connected our minds through quantum entanglement networks to share knowledge, to learn faster. He looked directly at Elara, his gaze intense. I am 247 years old, Captain. I've spent 230 of those years at war. The number hung in the air, suffocating. Elara felt a cold horror settle in her stomach. 247. But that means, you've been fighting since before I was born. Before my grandparents were born. Yes, Chen said simply. Most of our fleet commanders have similar service records. We don't just train for war anymore. We live it. We learn it. It is the air we breathe and the water we drink. Fighting who? Lieutenant Kess burst out, his young face a mask of confusion and dread. What's out there in the dark that's so terrible? Chen's expression grew grim, the warmth vanishing from his organic eye. The Void Collective, he said, the name alone sounding like a blasphemy. A race of non-corporeal energy beings that feed on the cores of stars. The Silicon Hives, machine intelligences that convert entire solar systems into computational substrate for their own unknowable purposes. The Endless Hunger, a trans-dimensional biological plague that consumes reality itself. He leaned forward, his mechanical hand curling into a fist on the table. We have been fighting these things, and others, for 3 centuries. Holding them at bay, keeping them from reaching civilized space. From reaching you. The Zathrron are aggressive, territorial, yes. But they are finite. The things we fight, they are apocalyptic. A hologram flickered to life above the conference table. It was Admiral Sarah Okonkwo. She looked younger than Chen, her face bearing fewer visible augments, but her eyes held the same ancient, weary depth. Captain Vesra, Okonkwo said, her voice calm and authoritative. I'm glad to see you well. I wished to join this conversation. Admiral, Elara said, inclining her head respectfully. What happens now? Now, Okonkwo said, we talk. Humanity is returning to the galactic community. Not as conquerors or overlords, but as partners. We will share our technology, our medical knowledge, our understanding of the threats that lie in the dark. We will offer our protection. In exchange for what? Kess asked, a hint of his earlier suspicion returning. What do you want from the coalition? Okonkwo smiled, a small, tired gesture. In exchange for you standing with us. The threats Marcus described are real, and they are moving closer to coalition space. In a century, perhaps less, their vanguards will arrive. When they do, we need to be ready. All of us. A unified front. There are conditions, Chen added, his voice firm. Humanity will operate as an independent entity. We will not answer to the coalition high command. We've learned difficult lessons about bureaucracy and politics getting in the way of survival. We will coordinate with you, share intelligence, fight beside you. But we make our own strategic decisions. That seems reasonable, Elara said slowly. And technology. Your medical tech alone could save billions. Sharing will be phased, Okonkwo nodded. We will provide defensive technology first. Improved shield generators, advanced medical nanites, more efficient FTL drives. Weapons technology will come later, once we are certain of its responsible application. We remember the Krathnok. We gave them jump drive technology, and they used it to bring war to our doorstep. We will not make that mistake again. We will help you become strong enough to defend yourselves, Chen said, his gaze locking with Elara's. But we will be watching. We will be the guardians at the gate, but you must learn to guard your own house. The conversation continued for hours, delving into logistics, diplomacy, the staggering implications of humanity's return. Through it all, Elara watched Chen. He was patient, insightful, and clearly a seasoned diplomat as well as a warrior. But underneath the calm, professional exterior, she sensed a deep, abiding sorrow. Finally, when the formal discussions had wound down, she dared to ask him the question that had been burning in her mind. Captain Chen, she began, her voice soft. All this preparation, all this fighting, for so long, are you happy? Has it been worth it? Chen was quiet for a long time. He looked down at his mechanical hand, flexing the fingers slowly, as if remembering a flesh that was long gone. I don't know if happiness is something soldiers like me get to have any more, Captain, he said, his voice barely a whisper. It's a luxury we packed away with our old lives, with the memory of green hills and blue skies. But purpose, yes, I have that in abundance. Knowing that the children of the coalition are out there, living, laughing, exploring the stars without the constant shadow of extinction, that is worth every scar. Every battle, every friend I've buried in the cold ground of the alien world. He looked at her with his mismatched eyes, one of flesh, one of machine, and in that moment, they were both just the same. We became what we needed to be, he said. Not what we wanted to be, perhaps. But what the galaxy needed us to be. And that has to be enough. Part 6. A New Dawn. 3 days later, Elara stood on the observation deck, watching the human fleet. They hadn't left. Chen had said they would remain until full coalition reinforcements arrived and the Kalar system was deemed secure. Their ships moved in quiet, vigilant patterns, a protective cordon around the wounded station and the planet below. On the surface, human medical teams in environmentally sealed armor worked alongside coalition personnel, setting up field hospitals and treating the injured. Human engineers, their efficiency almost supernatural, were already repairing power grids and atmospheric processors. They asked for nothing. They simply helped. Lieutenant Kess joined her, his posture less burdened than she had seen it in weeks. What do you make of them now, Captain? He asked quietly. Elara considered the question, watching a human medical frigate dock gracefully with the station. I think they are everything the legends said they were, and less, and more. They are harder, more dangerous. They carry a darkness in them we can't comprehend. She paused. But they also carry a light we desperately need. They lost everything, and that loss didn't break them. It reforged them into protectors. They are determined that no one else should ever feel that pain. Kes followed her gaze. They really mean it, don't they? About standing guard. Yes, Elara said softly. She called up a holographic star chart, highlighting the region known as the Dark Zone, the unofficial graveyard of human space. I wonder what else is out there, Kes. What other storms are gathering, just beyond the horizon? Whatever they are, Kes said, a new strength in his voice, at least now we won't have to face them alone. A priority transmission chimed. It was Chen. Captain Vesra. Our long-range scouts are detecting Zathrron remnant forces attempting to regroup in deep space. We're going to sweep the sector, ensure they don't become a problem for anyone else. We'll be back in a few days. Understood, Captain, Elara replied. Good hunting. One more thing, Chen added. Admiral Okonkwo informs me that the Terran Council is sending diplomats to meet with the Coalition High Command. They'll discuss the terms of a formal alliance. I've recommended you be included in the Coalition delegation. You understand what's at stake better than most. Elara felt a surge of pride and humility. I would be honored, Captain. Good. Terra out. On the viewer, the human fleet began to move. It was a breathtaking sight. Ships of every class forming up with silent, perfect precision. Then, in a coordinated flash of activated FTL drives, they vanished, leaving behind only the steady, comforting presence of a rear guard picket. Alone in her ready room, Elara began a personal log entry, wanting to capture her thoughts while they were still raw and real. Personal log. Captain Elara Vesra, Stardate 47.192. Today marks the beginning of a new era for the Galactic Coalition. Humanity has returned from their long exile, but they are not the people who left. They are warriors now, shaped by 3 centuries of relentless conflict in the unforgiving dark. They are stronger, stranger, and in many ways, frightening. Their bodies are fused with machine and alien biology, their minds connected in ways we can barely conceive, their lives stretched across centuries of war. She paused, gathering her words. But when we called from the brink of annihilation, from the depths of despair, they answered. They came out of the endless night and they saved us. Not for conquest, not for tribute, but because it was the right thing to do. Because they remember, with a clarity that has become their defining trait, what it is like to lose everything. She looked out at the stars, at the pinpricks of light that were the human picket ships. I believe we can trust them. More than that, I believe we must trust them. The galaxy is a far more dangerous place than we ever knew, and the storm that humanity has been holding back is still coming. We will need their strength, their experience, their unbreakable will in the dark days ahead. She took a deep, steadying breath. Whatever comes next, whatever shadows gather at the edge of known space, at least we will not face them alone. Far away, in the cold, unmapped reaches between the spiral arms, a surviving Zathrron hive node received a tight beam transmission. It contained no video, only a human voice, the same voice that had commanded the Indomitable. It was cold, precise, and utterly without mercy. Zathrron remnant, you touched what we protect. You threatened innocence under our watch. This is your only warning. Leave this region of space. Do not return. If you do, we will come for you. Not with one fleet, not with one battle. We will hunt every ship, every colony, every trace of your swarm until nothing remains but memory. The transmission ended, not with a threat, but with a statement of fact. 5 simple words that echoed in the silent void. Terra remembers. Terra protects. Terra endures. The message was received. Across the remnant networks, the order was given. The swarm began to retreat, to flee into the emptiest voids they could find. They had learned the price of touching what humanity had sworn to shield. And in the council chambers of the coalition, and on the bridge of every ship that had fought at Kalar Prime, a new chapter of galactic history began, written not in ink, but in starlight and sacrifice.